It's another assault on your ears, brought to you by Lower Dorks, a Star Trek Lower Decks podcast. Once again, we are being drawn into the seedy underbelly of the Star Trek universe with our favorite guest, Thomas Marrone. Join us as we break the warp barrier into the world that we like to call the Starships of Season 3.
And welcome back to the show, Thomas. It's great to have you back.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me back again. I'm sure you say that about all your guests, but I'll take it.
It's absolutely true in this case. Usually I don't mean it, but this time I definitely mean it.
Well, that's great to know. Thank you so much.
You've recently been moved to straight up art director on Star Trek Online. That must be pretty exciting.
Oh, it's very exciting. Yeah, so I'm in charge of the art discipline for the game. It's pretty wild to think about. I started, as a lowly junior UI artist, and over the past, almost 13 years, 12 and a half years, I kind of made my way from UI artist to ship lead to associate art director, and now art director. And feel very lucky to have that opportunity.
So I assume that Star Trek Online, the development team, is Klingon rules for promotion. So I assume how many people did you have to kill to reach this level?
We do not discuss it with outsiders.
Good save. You've had your fingers in a lot of other pies too. I mean, Star Trek Online ships are showing up everywhere. Do you want to kind of give us a little bit of info? Yeah. How's that been going?
Well, we pretty much owe all that to the production designer on Star Trek Picard, Dave Blass. He's just been a really great guy who if you think back to season 1 of Star Trek Picard, the final episode, there's this big showdown between a fleet of Romulan ships and a fleet of Starfleet ships. And the fleet of Starfleet ship that shows up is all one ship. It's all the same type of ship, but there are dozens of them, right?
Quite the internet backlash that came from
that. Right. Yeah. And so when Dave Blass became production designer on season 2 Picard, so production designer is actually kind of the same thing that I do on STO as art director, where you kind of manage the look of the show. Pretty much everything on screen goes through you that needs to be either designed, or the art department manages I'm going to go on Etsy and find a bunch of wine barrels for Chateau Picard, the look of the show, the production designer manages that. And so he has a stable of artists under him to do all these concept pieces, or like I said, to source out where they can find props. And then that's actually a different department. The art department visualizes the show, conceptualizes the show, and then they give all the drawings that they come up with to the VFX house and the prop department and the set department and all that stuff. And those people go build what the art department imagined. So Dave Blass took over for Picard season 2, and he ended up being production designer in season 3 as well. But he agreed with fans. He's a huge Star Trek fan, and I could go on and on about how great Dave is as a fan. As a person, he's a great, nice guy. But as a fan, he really understands that Star Trek is kind of a place. It's not just a TV show, it's a universe, and there's a sense of visual world building that holds it together. And to tie it back to Lower Decks also understands this incredibly well. Right. Yeah, you look at the style of, they work really harder than I think some of the other newer shows, to tie the show. Even though it's animated, it still feels like it could coexist with DS9, Voyager, TNG, all that. Right. And so Dave, experienced all that fan backlash about the fleet at the end of Picard season 1. And in season 2, there's another big fleet of Starfleet ships. And he saw this problem, and he's like, well, I don't want to go there again. I don't want to do that again. But we only have, so many dollars to work with for our VFX budget. And so he started looking around the internet and kept seeing ships that he liked. And oh, that's cool. And oh, that's cool. Where's that from? Star Trek Online. Where's that from? Star Trek Online.
Right.
And so he actually reached out to me on Twitter and started a conversation going, and he appreciated the fact that Star Trek Online has been going for over 13 years now. We launched in 2010, and a lot of the people, including me, including our concept artists, have been making Star Trek ships for 10 years. We are the most experienced people.
Yeah.
Right, at making
We're
Star Trek
the average show.
Right. No, that's true. Is there any designer? I mean, like you always have, like, you know, your oh god, suddenly my mind's going blank because you have those famed designers, right?
Yeah. You've got John Eves and Doug Drexler, like those guys. You know, they pop in and out of it. I mean, I think consistently, yeah.
I mean, they are designers, but they're not just doing Star Trek, and they are very limited in how much they're actually producing. Whereas just the sheer volume of stuff that's come out of Star Trek Online is just astronomical compared to everything that they did.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I certainly don't want to make a claim about volume because John Eves has done a lot over the years.
That's true. Eves definitely has.
Yeah. He started, I think, on Generations or DS9, one of the two. And then he worked through Enterprise. Then he came back for Star Trek 2009. I think he worked on all the Kelvin films. And now he's back, he worked on Discovery. I don't know if he's done any Strange New Worlds, but he's definitely worked on all 3 seasons of Picard.
Yeah.
So anyway, but the point stands that if we are not the most experienced, we are certainly some of the most experienced people doing Star Trek ships, and Dave appreciated that we got it, and we understood, the character of a Star Trek ship, and it's not just a generic futuristic spaceship, that there are certain rules that you follow and certain stylistic choices that you make to make something feel Star Trek. And so he reached out and we started working together, and a few ships ended up being in Picard season 2, and then which was amazing. And then April of last year, so about a year ago, I was actually at Star Trek. I think it was boarding the plane to Star Trek Mission, literally like in the line to board the plane to Star Trek Mission Chicago last year. And I get an email from Dave, and he's like, "Do you have the Enterprise F?" Like, that's all the email said, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, what? Like, I did, but it was the model was 6 years old at that point. It was really kind of under detailed compared to what we'd been doing. So as soon as I got back from that convention, I just buckled down and spent the next 3 weeks rebuilding the Enterprise from scratch. And I didn't even know that they were gonna for sure use it as the Enterprise, but like having the Odyssey show up in Picard to me was still,
you don't pass up on that opportunity.
Yeah, exactly.
Had a great B shots.
Though,
exactly.
I will say one thing: really they translate a lot of the ships to screen. The texturing on the hull is like, and they did the same thing with the E in the next gen films. The Aztecing on the hull is a bit too much.
Mm-hmm.
There's just a little too much bump on it, and there's like, I don't think it like looks good to me, right? I prefer the smoother hulls that you see, like the D had. And you know what? When the D returned in Picard, they did the same thing. It's just there's extra like layers to it. It's a little too much bumping on it, too much raised paneling. Whereas I prefer it to be a smoother.
I think it's it's interesting thing because it's sort of and we are way off the rails here, but it is
that is okay.
I think it's a kind of a product of the tools, right?
Yeah.
Like, when you're making a 6-foot model of something, you only have certain tools to work with, and and actually creating that sort of bumpy paneling is actually really hard. It adds to the work as opposed to just sort of etching lines into a flat surface, right? Yep. But when you're working in CG, the bump maps that's a lot easier to do that. Yeah. So you find that people are tempted to do it more. One of the things that, if you have aspiring ship artists listening to this, one of the things that I would recommend is remember that if you're making CG models of Star Trek ships, don't start by thinking them as 1,000-foot long spaceships. Start by thinking of them as 6-foot models that are also 1,000-foot spaceships, and look at, spend a lot of time studying those original miniatures. I have found that the models that I built for STO that were based on ships that had physical miniatures, they always looked better than the ships that we built based on a ship that was originally CGI. And I'm not saying that like CGI is not a good tool. It is a good tool. It's just, it's a tool. But like the fact that you're building something that was based on an object that had to exist meant that certain proportions were, mandatory. There was a certain minimum thickness for shapes, but there was also a certain scale differential that worked into by using this thin sheet of styrene. I don't know. It all just worked together really well. So, when Renaissance painters wanted to, make a name for themselves, one of the things they would do is just copy the paintings of the masters before them, right? And I think there's a logic to that in any creative endeavor. If you want to be a starship artist, go model some of the classics, the Enterprise refit and the Excelsior and all those things. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So anyway, Enterprise F and Picard, it was awesome.
I'd imagine.
It absolutely was. All right, well, cool. Well, thanks for giving us the lowdown. You've actually supplied the beverage we're enjoying this evening. That is an old-fashioned, and for those of you that don't know, an old-fashioned is made up of bourbon, bitters, simple syrup in a lot of cases, and ice. We were talking before the show about differences between our old-fashioned. I actually didn't have any syrup here, so I gave it. I put some grenadine in mine, and it has given it a kind of a reddish kind of look to it.
Yeah, that actually sounds pretty good.
I don't know. How'd you guys make your old-fashioned?
And I think I've said this before. You're supposed to use a sugar cube. It's supposed to be a sugar cube. You pour the bitters on it. You dump in the bourbon, and then usually some sort of orange slice or something, or a cherry. But who has sugar cubes these days? Come on.
No, nobody. Thomas, what'd you use on yours? What's your old fashioned go-to?
I actually probably had simple syrup. I just didn't look deep enough in the liquor cabinet, but I found some blue Curacao, and so I thought, oh, this might be kind of cool because you have the bitters in there anyway, and so I used some of that, and it was actually cool. I was saying earlier that it actually turned the whole drink kind of this really deep green. It's almost like the green when you dye Easter eggs green, like that color of dye.
Right.
And so now I have my Aldebaran whiskey.
That's so good.
Oh my God.
And Aaron, what color is yours?
Well, I mean, mine is just the
brownish.
I do find it interesting though that we've all got our old take on the old fashioned, and they're all slightly different. Kind of harkens to a certain scene at the end of this season we'll be talking about later.
Absolutely. Well, you know what? We need to get into talking about some ships. So how about
we're here to talk about ships from season 3.
Yeah, we need to do that. So the criteria for ships making this list. So there are either completely new designs specific to Lower Decks, or Star Trek existing old designs that have had its first appearances in Lower Decks.
Yeah.
So without further ado, shall we go ahead and start going in on these?
You say that here. Like you're dreading it. Like, oh boy, we gotta start talking about these ships.
There are a lot of ships. There are a lot of ships in this. We're gonna
be here all night.
Yeah,
we can go quickly past the ones that we don't like. We saw it First Contact next.
Yeah, there are certain things. Absolutely. But let's get started from the first episode, Grounded. The very first ship on our list is actually, I don't know, kind of a dud. It's the kind of shuttle-like design that we see that, Captain Freeman is supposedly piloted to help sabotage the Pakleds.
Have we not seen this before? I feel like
is this from something?
Maybe, I don't know. To me, it looks like the Eagle 5 or whatever from, right, a little bit like the Lone Star's RV from Spaceballs.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Yeah.
A little bit.
I mean, it lacks the wings.
Yeah, right. It kind of looks like the butt of a Type 6 shuttlecraft, but then they just kind of, I don't know, made it a little boxier.
Yeah,
I don't know.
It's definitely has its roots in a Starfleet shuttle, but they, I think they just sort of were like, hey, background artist, do a shuttle, and they did, and that was cool.
I mean,
and then they did.
I like it. I don't have any complaints about it. I think it fits well with the Star Trek universe. It's like a shuttle, but it's not a Starfleet shuttle, and I think that's a good design, right?
Yeah.
It's not too adventurous. It follows the basic layout of the shuttle. It's got the 2 nacelles.
It's got the nacelles.
Yeah, which I like. It's very boxy. Yeah, overall, I'm going to give it an A+.
Wow, your first A+ is this. This is getting it.
Well, he's grading on a curve for shuttlecraft.
Right. Yeah, I see. Okay. Oh god. Okay. Well, so much for that. So it's a little background shuttle. Not much else we can say about it. But the next one, also from Grounded, is the Playground Vulcan ship from the Bozeman, Montana.
It's got a
amusement
little
park
slide coming out of the. That's amazing.
It's got swings. The funny part, I was like, at first I was like, did they take? Oh, so first of all, this actually has a real name to it. It's the Taplana Hath survey ship, which I didn't know the name of. Now I do. And I was like, did they just like take a real one and then you know how they do it where they just like take fighter jets and they just kind of cement over the controls and then little kids can go play on it. I was like, did they just do that? But then I looked at the scale of the ship versus the one that's in Lower Decks versus the one that they show in First Contact. It's completely different. So I guess they just straight up just made a little like Vulcan ship made of plastic and then stuck some swings on it and the slide.
That actually always kind of bothered me in First Contact, right? That
it's like too big?
No, it's too small, right? Like it's a survey ship, but it didn't look like it had like living quarters like much scientific equipment.
We don't know that was the actual Vulcan survey ship, though. I mean, everybody sort of assumes it was.
Yeah, but I think it was just a lander, right?
Yeah.
That makes sense to me. So I'm just assuming that that's just the landing craft. It's like their version of a shuttlecraft.
It could be
the actual survey ship.
I love that the slide is coming out the middle of it because in First Contact when they show the ship, like the door kind of like turns into a little loading ramp, and some guy on the Lower Deck staff was like, that kind of looks like a slide, and then
there's some fun trivia about this. Because we were talking about John Eves earlier. So John Eves designed this as he did most of the ships in First Contact. And the angles on this thing were so weird that he actually built a little maquette and then used the maquette as reference for his like concept drawings, which I thought was kind of funny. Yeah, he came from a model building background. So he used to work in model shops and then transitioned over to doing concept illustrations, and he used that on his concept drawings for the First Contact lander, which I thought was cool.
Interesting. Phil, I still think it's ridiculous they just made this at like 50% scale.
Doesn't bother me. I mean, that's
I don't know. I think it's full scale. I think it's the original.
Well, any theme park you go to, there's they have like is the
true.
Millennium Falcon and Galaxy's Edge, is that thing full scale? I guess it might be, but there are other things on that you would have a size reduction just to make it a cool attraction.
Sure,
I think it's the original lander. They actually never let the Vulcans leave.
They're like it's like from the Enterprise episode where they just pull out the shotgun and the alternate universe thing, and they just kept it. We're like, we're keeping this for the kids.
For the kids.
Now they just have it. Yeah. Okay, well, let's move on. Also in Grounded, also from the Bozeman amusement park is, of course, the Phoenix. I don't know, ride, I guess. They must have multiple of these.
I love the idea that it's just, you get to a point in your society where it's like, yes, you can just go to an amusement park and just ride a rocket into space.
It just takes you in space. Yeah. You literally go to warp, pop around the moon and then just come back. You got to think like all of these actual spaceships that are the Phoenixes are just made with actual 25th century tech.
Right, yeah.
And, It's all cosmetic, but it's like, it's that absurd level of technology that spaceflight, getting from Earth to orbit, is so easy. It's an amusement park ride.
Exactly. Now. Yeah. Well, and also the infrastructure around the idea that, because you basically need a corridor, right? That this ride can travel and nobody's going to bother it or fly into it. So there's got to be literally like Earth traffic control. Well, watch out, because this is where the Bozeman amusement park ride goes.
I've always wondered about that. Is there like some sort of like air traffic control or space traffic control grid that like when you show up in orbit around any like populated planet, it just kind of like syncs up with your like flight navigation computer, so it prevents accidents from happening? I gotta believe that level of tech is there,
for sure,
because we practically have that now, just a shitty version of it.
Yeah, well, I mean, we have a better version of it for planes.
Manual.
Well, I mean, I'm just saying that it would, It's shittier than what would have to exist if
Yeah.
getting into orbit.
People are
and
going to
flying
warp.
Yeah,
is
absolutely.
Yeah.
they have jetpacks. They have rocket boots. I feel like if we had rocket boots right now, there would be more planes falling out of the sky.
There very well may be. Yeah, pretty good. The model actually looks pretty good too. From the thing, I mean, this is actually a multi-stage rocket, or is it? Did they show it being a multi-stage rocket in the episode?
I don't remember,
think so,
actually.
This is actually something that bothered me. Was if it was multi-stage, the booster stage wasn't very large, right? Just doesn't work for the kind of thrust you would need to get a vessel that's this large into orbit, right? Like the front half, the cockpit, I mean, that's practically a Dragon. It's actually slightly larger.
Mm-hmm.
And think about what it takes us now to get that to orbit. So the question is, by World War III, which I guess in the Star Trek timeline has already happened, what kind of...
Is it? It's coming up, right?
It's happened or it's any day now. I can't remember. But it's all
Sounds about right.
There just wouldn't be that much of a tech advancement in, thruster technology, right?
Yeah.
Especially since they even mentioned it was lifted into orbit using simple chemical propulsion.
Right. I mean, the second stage has got to be like a fusion reactor or something to power the warp core. Like nothing short of like a nuclear fusion reactor would do it. So
I kind of wonder if they never actually made it to orbit. They just made it high enough into Earth's atmosphere to where they could activate the warp drive without it completely destroying the vessel.
Yeah, maybe. It's that's some Kerbal space program stuff.
Space program level engineering. I totally can see Zephyr Cochrane being all like, "No, listen to me, guys. I was playing Kerbal last night, and I found out a thrust to weight ratio program."
I love it. I hope this amusement park ride doesn't actually have like rocket pieces that fall off into the atmosphere.
Or maybe they're like holographic or something, right? Like it's
okay.
Yeah,
just for the effect. Yeah, the visual effect. Like, hey, look, there goes the rocket, and then it disappears like 10 seconds later or something.
Or it's possible like it is two stages, and the first stage, which was normally expendable when it launched, now actually has so much power that it has like a small computer on board, and it just lands back in its original place.
Ooh. Yeah, it does the SpaceX thing. It just lands back at the.
I mean, it's a funny thing because I've been through just with friends and stuff. I've been to Disney quite a bit the past couple of years, and so when this episode aired, I was just sort of thinking about the actual theme park logistics of like, well, if you're serving like presumably this is one of the most popular destinations like on Earth, right? If it or I don't know, maybe on Earth, maybe in the Federation, who knows? I mean, it's first contact. It's sort of like everything started there, right? So
you're gonna make me just like question the logic of that whole scene, aren't you?
Well, I'm just saying, like you go to like
logistically, how does this work?
Right. Well, you go to Soarin' or you go to some of these other rides, and or Star Tours or whatever, right? And they have like 6 cars, right? Like that churn through people, right? Because they want to keep people moving. Right. And so like it's like, I like the idea that there are like 6 Phoenix rockets that are shooting off all at the same time.
Yeah. There's gotta be.
Or
right?
I mean like or the other option is that like in each Phoenix rocket there are 6 cabs. And so there were like cabs that we didn't see, that they just kidnapped a bunch of other people that were in the other cabs on their rocket when they commandeered
it. They're just the one that's in the front that got the window.
Exactly.
They have like the good seats, and everyone else is like in the back. And when that other passenger just commandeers it, they're just still stuck. They're like locked
fun to
in the
think
back.
about. I mean, I'm not saying this is a plot hole. I like the idea that even when you have a society with holodecks and stuff, that people actually want to do the thing for real, right? Yeah,
do the real thing for sure. Yeah, agreed. Anyway, yeah, it's a good time. I love it. The model looks great too. It looks exactly like out of First Contact. I think possibly even more detailed. Or did they use a model for the First Contact?
I believe so. I believe they used miniature for that.
I think it was a model.
I mean, it looks pretty good, for CG.
I mean, there is a miniature of it. I mean, whether use.
sure.
Yeah, whether that was what they used
Right.
or whether they used
I think,
it.
a lot of so for First Contact, especially, there were certainly miniatures for pretty much everything except for the battleships, the Borg battleships. I mean, there was they used the
right.
Borg cube miniature, and they used the miniature for the Enterprise. I think they used the filming miniature for the Defiant. Maybe that I'm not sure about. But then all the the Akira, the Norway, the Saber, the Steamrunner,
Right.
those were all CG only. And then the Enterprise E was a mix. They had a physical model, but they also made a digital model, I believe. But I mean, back then, like digital. This is 96, I think. So it was a lot easier to shoot a movie with digital with physical models than to make something digital that held scrutiny still.
Yeah. 25 years ago. So old yet. That movie came out. All right, well, let's move on. We spent a lot of time on the crazy amusement park ride. Gosh, also in great. We're only halfway through the ships from the first episode, by the way. We're gonna get there. All right. But the next one, it's the Drydock that the Cerritos, the naked Cerritos is in. There are a lot of different Drydocks in Star Trek. I did a little bit of research. This looks like the closest to the Drydock that the Enterprise E is in at the end of
I'd agree with that.
So it feels like they just took that one right out. Yeah, I don't know much else to say about that. It's a Drydock. It's holding the ship, but it's interesting to see.
No, it's cool. It's cool that they picked an area appropriate one, right?
I'd be interested to get your feeling on. It's such a Star Trek iconic thing, but like Drydocks always bothered me. What function do they?
Something bothered you?
Yeah, Stavros. Like what function? Like it just feels like it's a lot of scaffolding for no purpose.
Well, it
doesn't seem to be holding anything.
Right. I think, one of the things that we probably aren't seeing is there are probably a lot of little tractor beams and stuff that will keep it keep it in there. And it's not that they don't need to be on all the time, right? Like, because as long as the ship is moving, remember that in space nothing is ever actually standing still, right? Like, and so as long as the ship is moving the same speed in the same direction as the Drydock, then it can, it doesn't need anything actually holding it down.
What I'm thinking of more is like looking back to Ent in that episode, what was it, Dead Stop, right? Where they visit the repair station. That thing had like mechanical arms and tools built in.
Yeah.
Like Drydock, it never really seems to show any functionality like that.
Yeah, I think the TMP one had a lot of that built into the ceiling. That was all just. Remember, it was retracted because the Enterprise was about to launch.
Yeah,
but I get where you're coming from. I think it's a staging area. I think it would actually be more appropriate to call it a Drydock if it was enclosed and pressurized, right? If you think about what a Drydock actually is now today, it's the ship is out of water, right? And so allegorically, like space is the water. And so if it were it could still be 0G, but if it at least had air, people could work on the ship without needing spacesuits, which would be safer in some ways. So
possibly.
Yeah. So anyway.
And we need to see a Drydock that is pressurized.
I suppose you could make the argument maybe the inside of her space dock is pressurized, but I don't think we have anything to just say one way or the other.
Evidence.
Yeah, probably. It would be a lot of air to pressurize the inside of the space dock.
It would be, yeah, that's true.
All right, well, I'm going to stop shitting on things now. Sorry.
Why is it Drydock dry? Anyway, next, we're still in Grounded, still in the first episode. The Space Cops space station. So if you recall in the episode, there are all these Drydocks. There's just these Starfleet security dudes keeping an eye on them. It's funny. Memory Alpha actually calls this one Gary's space station because I assume there's one of the security guys is actually named Gary.
That's great.
Yeah, this is a funny. We've seen this space station reused all the time in all of Star Trek. I think it's called the Regular One type space station. It's I think they first used it in
so they
very multiple purpose.
The office
is it?
Yeah.
In the motion picture.
In the motion picture.
Yeah,
that's right. It was upside down in the motion picture, right?
Wait. if it first premiered in the motion picture,
Yep.
that means all subsequent appearances, it's been upside
Yes,
down.
exactly.
Are upside down.
I agree with Aaron.
I see.
Which is actually kind of sad because, like, I think having it reversed from how it's normally portrayed, it gives it a very unique feel that you don't see too often.
It does. You know, in my defense, is anything ever really upside down in space?
Everything is always upside down in space.
Okay, fair enough. But is there anything unique about this? I mean, it's on screen for a few seconds.
Really, I mean, I think the blue lights on the bottom of the docking platforms there, I think that might be new, but you know, it's a classic Trek design. It's a cool space station. I mean, it makes sense that you'd use infrastructure. I mean, like, there's one thing about like ships being upgraded, sure, but I mean, like, if it's a facility that's sort of staying in place, I feel like it'd be a lot easier to just keep that current over the decades or centuries. We certainly do that in the real world.
That's one of the things a lot of people, like, you don't think about, because we're so used to being like earthbound, where just being will slowly cause whatever you're in to get eroded and, you know, fall to pieces. But I mean, in space, especially if you have something like shields, like basic shields to prevent from, you know, stellar radiation and stuff. I mean, an exterior hull, if it's well built, I mean, geez, that could last for ages before it would need to be replaced. And then it's just a matter of, you know, replacing the machinery inside and upgrading from time to time.
Yeah. I guess the Space Cops space station that watches Drydocks probably doesn't need as much frontline tech.
Well,
as,
I think they didn't just watch
Space
Dock. I've got to believe that there was more to that facility.
They watched the Borg cube fly by and did nothing.
Yeah.
They're just like, well, there's nothing we could do. You know,
we have
hit the red alert button.
We have no guns,
you can do.
So, you know, have fun, Borg.
That's right. All right, moving on. So we're still in Grounded.
There's a lot of ships in this episode.
Yeah, there are a lot. It's true.
Oh
but we actually see the return of the Federation attack fighters, which I always thought were called Peregrines, but apparently that's just
Bannon.
the name just used sometimes.
Yeah. That's because this is one of those things that people sort of argue about on Trek BBS ad nauseum. And
that's right.
And I think there is an episode of TNG where somebody says a line like, Maquis are now using Peregrine-class couriers or something like that. And it's this model, but also in that shot or in that episode is the same model that Chakotay had, which is a different ship. Yeah. His ship was the Valjean, but it showed up in TNG first. Yeah,
clearly
very
different. Right? Yeah.
So I don't know. Attack Fighter is I think that's the only, in terms of like canonical name that is referred to on screen. I thought it was great that I actually really love these ships. I think they're really fun, and I kind of like it when ships are a little weird and ugly. Yeah. It feels utilitarian, right? Like I like it when it feels like, I mean, there's obviously a fine line. You don't want it to just be ugly for ugly's sake, but I like it when things feel like they're designed around a purpose, and I feel like these ships are like that. So I was really happy to see them.
Yeah, these are actually very clearly single-person fighters too, because they show the security dudes on the inside, and it's clearly a cockpit. So there's just
I think they were built for the runabout set, so they can fit 4 people or something, but it's still like a really small Starfleet ship.
And you say ugly, but like I'm not sure. Like I wouldn't say they're necessarily ugly. But they're boxy. They don't have the normal Starfleet sweeping aesthetic.
Yeah, I think that's a better word.
Literally, the only problem I have with it is the weird spoiler they have, the like roll bar on it. Like other than that, you know, I like it overall.
You know, it's weird in this episode. I think they show up on the view screen, and that's the only real look we see of them. Does it seem like to you guys like they kind of look very kind of fisheye lens?
Yeah, they do. They look like they're rendered with a weird FOV or something.
Yeah.
There was I don't know if I can find it. There's a guy who did a model of this ship. This guy made this amazing like update to it where he sort of smoothed out a bit. It's still like clearly the same ship, but he smoothed it out. He added a lot of like fighter pilot or like fighter jet like livery to it. and really like fleshed it out, I guess is the word I'm looking for, where it's like, wow, that's a really cool take on it that makes it, you can tell when a design is sort of like for the background or for a cameo versus like when somebody spends extra time on it to really to make it, a hero prop. And this guy did that, took that extra mile. That's kind of useless for your listeners, but I'm going to put it in chat for you guys. Just so you
know, it's a cool detail for sure.
I think I actually found what you're talking about on your Twitter feed.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Yeah,
Hanger B Productions.
Amazing.
It's very high detail.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, I like it. It still has that spoiler problem that I don't like, and I don't.
How
know
dare
why.
you? Spoiler makes it cool. It makes it faster, man. Come on.
Of course it does.
Well, like he added all the little RCS thrusters. He angled the front nacelle buster collectors so it follows the line of the triangle at the front. Yeah. He added some underwing munitions, which is super cool, and they look like photon torpedoes. It looks like he's got like 4 photon torpedoes and 2 quantum torpedoes. Added the squadron number, like just a lot of cool stuff to really flesh it out. Yeah. Like it's like if you were gonna make a TV show about these guys, like this is the model that you like use.
Make it like this.
Yeah.
So I will say great. One flaw that I see with this design that bothers me. I guess 2, because I already mentioned the spoiler. Spoiler bothers me. But it breaks the rule of the nacelles have to have line of sight with each other.
Well, I mean, that's the original. I mean, so Hanger B Productions, the guy who made this, he's...
No, the original design has that problem too, right? And that's just a flaw with it that bothers me a little bit.
Yeah, I think you basically have to... I mean, there's so many Star Trek ships that do that nowadays.
And it bothers me.
It doesn't even Defiant does that.
No, the Defiant actually is so clever because you think it does it, but if you look at the underside, it's cut out. So they actually have 50% line of sight.
So I think you could make the argument that the big impulse engines on the back, that whatever needs to have line of sight is like stored in that part of the ship.
That's true.
I don't know how I feel about that. It's entirely possible that like that back section is just hollow, right?
Yeah.
I don't know.
The other, I mean, anyway, this is a cool. So go look up Federation Attack Fighter on Sketchfab, Hanger B Productions, to see what we're talking about. It's a really cool model. It's a lot of fun to spin around.
Cool model.
And crank up Danger Zone while you're looking at it.
I'll throw the link in the episode description for sure. Let's move on. We're still not out of freaking grounded.
Thankfully, the next 2 episodes I think only have like one ship.
To be fair, like the beginning of this, the first couple episodes and the last couple have a lot of stuff in them.
Anyway, so later on in Grounded, still, when Captain Freeman is telling the story of how they tracked down the Packleads, we actually get a look at an Akira that has not been seen in Star Trek officially for some time. I assume, based on context in the story, kind of assuming that this ship belongs to Kelsey Grammer, the Captain Morgan Bateson. What do you guys think of this ship? I think it's another, like, it's similar to the Federation Attack Fighters, where it feels like it's kind of like a more matte than a 3D model. Is this a 3D model? It's hard to tell by looking at it from an untrained eye.
I don't think so. I mean, like, so I think the Attack Fighters and this ship, aren't they kind of stationary on the screen?
All 3D. They are stationary.
So they're probably just paint overs, because I mean, you don't to bring a 3D model into your show is quite a lot of effort. So if you find a screenshot you like, and actually Lower Decks has done this a few times, where they like, you can tell somebody in the art department Googled like Wrath of Khan engine room and found a screenshot from the movie and painted over it, right? Which is totally that's art, and that's production art on a schedule, right? That's just how you have to do it. You just can't do it any other way. Yep.
Right.
So yeah, I think this and the Attack Fighters are both kind of in the same.
While the Akira might be a paint over, the ship it's shooting at definitely can't be. Cause
you don't think so?
Yeah, well, I mentioned this before. I spent ages trying to figure out what ship this was, because I was like, I've seen this before.
I didn't know.
This means something, as I sculpted in my mashed potatoes. So
not weird at all.
It's like a redress of the Retellian freighter from Enterprise. And it gets redressed a few times in Enterprise. Every time it's slightly different, and this one doesn't match any of the redresses from Enterprise. So it's possible it's like a paint over, but they definitely took a lot of artistic liberty with it. The dimensions are wrong on the like nose portion. It's like none of the back half is really there like it is when it appears in Enterprise. And the pods, the wing things on the side, are like they're more like wings rather than cargo pods.
Interesting.
Yeah, but it's definitely that. I mean, the nose portion and the top center portion, the details are just way too close for it to not be that ship.
Yeah, it's such a small ship with a small amount of real estate that's only shown for a few seconds.
Yep.
Yeah, it's interesting.
And yet it haunts my dreams. So small for such a short time. I lie awake at night. Where have I seen you?
Thomas, do you have anything to say about that?
I see a comparison somebody made. Well, what's one of the things that's interesting about it is I think maybe we're only seeing because there's a big explosion, and I think the explosion is like covering up the back pods. Maybe.
Yeah, it very well could be. Yeah.
So, but you can see the I see what Aaron's talking about in terms of the front is very much based on the Retellian freighter, but there's a lot of other stuff going on there. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, the butt's kind of getting exploded, so understandable.
That whole image is great. I love it.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the Akira, and it's fun seeing it kicking butt.
I love the Akira. Yeah, it's great.
Well, and just the rendering of it that they've done is very solid. It looks nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, that the only thing that I wish that had a little bit more detail. Same thing with the Defiant that shows up later. No registry number when there theoretically should be on Starfleet ships. This is one of those weird details that bothers me a bit. The ship is so pretty. I just wish it had a little number, a little name. I just want to know all the details. What do I call this ship, man? I don't know. It's just Akira from Flashback.
That's one thing Dave Blass is great about is he has released like on Twitter the registry the name and registry number of all the ships in the
I love it. For that. We need Lower Decks equivalent
because that's what Star Trek fans love.
They do.
You don't need to give them good storytelling. You know, this is really where they're falling down. Is all this new Trek? They're like, we're going to tell great stories, and we're going to have solid characters, and we're going to have tension and action and suspense. And the fans are just like, give me registry numbers. I want to know what's the plaque on the bridge on that ship. How come it's never in frame?
Do you guys remember when the Abrams reboot came out? There was an Amazing Onion. It was one of their video pieces. It was like Star Trek fans furious that the new Star Trek movie is entertaining and watchable.
Yeah, I remember that. Sounds about right. Sounds about right.
You know what I mean? That's anyway. We focus too much on like the negative, but like there's always going to be stuff to complain about, and there's going to be somebody to complain about it. But that doesn't mean that's the whole fandom. It's just the vocal ones usually.
It was just it was just such a it was as a person who has sort of a mixed relationship with the JJ movies. I certainly saw myself in the attack.
It was
on
too real.
Yeah, it was too real.
Yeah. Well, the JJ movies for me like have the same problem that a lot of like modern Trek has, where like they do these big setups and then they don't follow through on them. Which I mean, that's Star Trek as a whole, though. Voyager is lost and alone in the Delta Quadrant, yet somehow never runs out of shuttles or torpedoes.
One of those things.
Enterprise, it's their first adventure into the unknown in the distant past of the Star Trek universe, and yet everything is very familiar.
Yeah, you gotta. I mean, I think that's one of the things that you sort of forget that to do that world building and then refer to it when you're telling these stories, right? Like
the world building has to serve the story.
Yeah, a lot of writers see well-defined world building as constraining, but I as an artist, you got to remember the constraints are good. Like you do better work sometimes when you have to color in the lines.
Totally.
Bringing this back around to what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Star Trek has
Necessity's mother of
laid
invention.
out design rules for starships.
Yeah.
And when they're trying to be creative with them, you get things like the Defiant.
That's right.
Yeah. All right, cool. Well, I
Yeah.
think we move on to the next ship, which is
Yeah.
actually I think is underappreciated. I actually
Oh
really
yeah,
like this ship.
I feel like I saw some recent internet commentary
Yeah.
from you on this
Yeah.
very ship.
Yeah.
But it's the again, it's still from Freeman's story. We get a view of an Olympic class investigating Packlet Planet. We haven't really seen one of these in Star Trek canon since, gosh,
Well,
Good Things.
there was one in Lower Decks before.
Yes.
There was a flashback to Mariner's time on a previous ship. I forgot the name of the ship. You know, it was docked at DS9, and
yes.
Mariner had her crazy updo.
Right.
Yes,
that's right.
And you know, it was a young baby Mariner, but it was in the
Right.
last ship too. So, one thing that you want to say about the Olympic? I don't want to dwell on. We got to get past grounded here, but
You
could just make this episode about grounded.
This is going to be a 3-parter, and the first one is just going to be grounded.
Oh boy,
I think.
But so when Matt Jeffries was designing the original Enterprise, this is actually one of the shape configurations he experimented with. Was a big, instead of a saucer, a big sphere.
I remember
A sphere is actually
thing.
it was a perfect pressure vessel, right? So it sort of makes sense. If you remember 2001 Space Odyssey, the Discovery also has a big sphere shape at the front. It's a good shape for a spaceship.
Well, kind of, right? Because on the one hand, it's a great pressure vessel. On the other hand, it's not great for surface area, which makes it because one of the things that the problem with spaceships is heat radiation, right?
Right.
There's really nowhere to radiate it to, and so
Do Star Trek ships have that problem though?
No,
I guess
they never talk about it.
No. I mean, in the Discovery in 2001, the original design had giant radiator fins, but Stanley Kubrick told the artist to remove them because, quote, spaceships don't have wings.
Yeah.
He thought there were wings instead of radiators.
Nice.
If you want to see a ship that actually, like in a popular sci-fi universe, that actually does think about heat management, the Venture Star, I think, in Avatar, in the first Avatar
is
movie,
one of the best starship designs in recent sci-fi. It's just so well thought out.
Yeah, it's very well thought out. It's not, it's only in like 5 minutes in the movie, if that.
Yeah, which is weird. Like they put so much. It's probably just like they had some designer on staff. Like, yeah, just make us a realistic starship, and that's what he came up.
Yeah. I think that's one of the things that James Cameron does really well. We talked about world building earlier. James Cameron really cares about world building to the point where they hired an ethnomusicologist to create the music of the Na'vi on, they went to that length.
Yeah.
But then it just sort of fell down. Like, you need both. You need a very, I don't know, a lot of people love Avatar, and I think it's a watchable movie.
It's
the
greatest
in terms
movie of all time. It's the only movie with a robot knife fight. Robot knife fight!
Anyway, we're done with the Olympic. Yeah. I think it's great.
I like it.
Some people think the ball's doofy. I don't care. I think it's cool.
The ball is not the problem with that starship. It does the weird thing with like the nacelles where it feels like the pylons are just tacked on. But other than that, it really it's great design language. It has an excessive amount of windows. It has an excessive amount of surface area, and all of that just tells the story that this isn't an exploration ship. This isn't a war vessel. This is something, and the only ones we've really ever seen are like medical ships and whatnot.
Right.
This is something used for a people purpose rather than some other war or exploration or cargo hauling. It's good design.
We had fun with this, and so we recently, I say recently, all the years blur together. I think it was late last year. We did kind of our own version of the Olympic class in Star Trek Online, and what we ended up deciding was that the ball. This is not canon. This is how it works in Star Trek Online. But we thought it'd be cool if the ball was actually sort of a temporary starbase. And so the ship, the ball actually separated, and the ship, left the ball behind in orbit so that it could, take care of the crisis.
Yeah.
And then the ship came back later to pick it up or whatever.
I've always said that that's a good
Right.
idea for starship design in Star Trek, is take the saucer, or in this case, ball separation, and make that like a long-term, or not even long-term, but like short-term base, right?
Yeah.
I think
Right.
that's great design concept.
I'm just imagining their captain going, "Prepare for emergency ball sep." And that's
I think we officially called it sphere separation.
Sphere
Oh,
separation?
is
That's
good.
less
avoid-
fun. Way less fun.
to avoid exactly that problem. Oh man.
It's time to drop our
Anyway.
ball. All right.
Deploy the ball.
not canon at
Enough
all.
junior high humor. I think. Are we done?
Yeah, we
Yeah, we're
finished
done.
grounded. We finished grounded.
Oh God, I'm so glad we're no longer grounded.
I know we made it. All right. The next is not a ship, but I included it anyway. It's from the episode Least Dangerous Game. Planet Dulaine has something technical problem about not being able to transport through their atmosphere, and they have orbital lifts.
Yeah,
So
space
this is not the first
elevator.
time orbital lifts have been in Star Trek. So, we've seen these before, but not quite this design.
Is this the second time? Because there was one in Voyager.
Right.
Right on the
They had a
mining
space elevator.
planet, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Neelix
Right.
they get trapped
Felix
on
and,
one of the cars with a
Tuvok,
terrorist or
right?
something.
Get
Yeah.
trapped on.
And that was
Right.
actually kind of a cool. I think they sort of undersold how I forget what's the rating on this podcast.
You can say whatever you want.
Okay, all right.
There's no
It's
rating.
rated
I think they
NC-17.
I think they undersold in that Voyager episode how batshit insane space elevators are.
They really are.
And I think they did a better job in this episode of like, because it's easier when it's animated to have her do the free fall and all that stuff. Like this was a fun episode, and it was, it sort of, it leaned into the concept in cool ways.
Yes.
The funny part about this, just looking at the design now, I mean the elevator is a very small amount of the area used. It looks like maybe the top is just one big lounge. And they kind of they talk about the episode about how they had to evacuate the elevators, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, you would assume that the top level is some sort of like docking station. Which actually interesting thing about this design, space elevators, like if you had like a space elevator designed like this where it just goes up into orbit and then there's, a big like docking ring at the top, like that shit would fall down like right away. You have to have like a counterweight on the other side.
Yeah.
But then there's also like the reality of the like sheer insane amount of maintenance that would be necessary unless like you had some very advanced material science. Like they're always talking about, we'd need to have carbon nanotubes to build the tether out of. And it's like, even then, like you would need just like crazy amounts of maintenance because this thing is going to constantly be getting corroded by the atmosphere.
Have you guys watched Foundation, the show?
Yes,
I haven't been able to, but
they have an amazing sequence of the space elevator in that show. I don't want to spoil it, but it's a lot of fun. It's really cool.
I don't know. Space elevators, very cool, but they're questionable concept at best, especially in a world with anti-gravity.
all right. Well, let's move on. In the episode "Mining the Mines," we actually get the USS Hood showing up. This is a ship that we've seen on screen and at the very least next gen. Talked about all the time. One of Riker's old ships. Looks pretty much exactly the same as we've seen it appearing in next gen when it showed up.
I think it looks exactly the same because in next gen.
Oh, what's different?
Well, in next gen it was a model, and in this one it's a cartoon.
They added there are a lot more windows on this.
Are there?
Is
that on the engineering hull, like the kind of stripes?
I think all
windows?
around it has more windows, but the engineering hull is just the most egregious example. But I've never really I have a love-hate relationship with the Excelsior because it does that weird thing with the nacelles and the pylons where it feels like they're just tacked on.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, like that was the whole idea. Like,
it was
the nacelles are supposed to be tacked on because they're supposed to be swappable modular pieces.
Yeah, and this vessel was like in its original appearance, it was a test bed ship, right?
Right.
And I think as far as that design goes, it works really well. But then, of course, they kept it around for ages because they had the model.
They spent so much money building the model. They got to get their. They certainly got their money's worth out of that model. Jeez.
It's just interesting they went back to that. I would say the old well. I mean, it's not like it's shown up tons of times, but I mean, it's not like the hood's unheard of.
I think that was. I think they wanted to. Did they show Captain DeSoto in this episode, or just say it was the hood?
There's after I remember after the opening credits, they kind of show the captain being like, "Yeah, we did it," and he beams up and they leave.
Oh, okay.
The mess.
There's a great if you'll indulge me here, there's a great fan project going on right now, a Wolf 359 memorial. Let's search Wolf 359 on Twitter. I think you'll find it. But it's basically an oral history of the Battle of Wolf 359, and the hood and Captain DeSoto are a big part of that. That's interesting. I could talk about that thing for an hour. It's really, really well done. It's an oral history, so it's like, do you remember if you've ever read World War Z, where it's like each chapter is a different person?
It's documentary.
Right. This is like that. Though. Yeah, exactly. This is like that, but for the Battle of Wolf 359.
It actually sounds amazing.
It's really fun. It's really good. It's really good because it's like it doesn't just interview the characters that are in the episode. It does, like, their interviews with Riker, Shelby, Data, and they nail the voice of all those characters. But it's also they also interview all the people that like should have been a part of that, like the chief of staff of the Federation, and they're like, the Borg are coming. We have to evacuate Earth. And and they like call up this guy who runs a colony transport service, and they're like, "How long would it take you to evacuate Earth?" And he's like, "Years." And the Borg are like,
I love it.
10 days away or whatever. And so it's like that level of like fleshing out the whole scenario in really cool ways. So that's amazing. Go check that out. It's fantastic. It's phenomenal.
Well, let's move on to our next ship. On the episode Room for Growth, we actually get a number of ships. The first of which is the Dove. It's the, I'm going to call it rehabilitation, the mental health ship. Interestingly, has an Adosian captain, much the same as the Ostler, who is, they do like the transport to the farm in a previous season. Aaron and I talked about this a little bit earlier. Like, seems like a very detailed, high production value ship considering the role it has in this episode. I'm wondering if this is just another situation where, they had an artist like, okay, we got to make a new ship. And he just went nuts on it, but they only show it for a few seconds on screen.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't think it's not a reuse of anything, right? It looks new to me.
I don't think so. Seen this before. I will say though, like, it has design elements that are taken from all over the place. It almost feels like somebody took a whole bunch of pieces of other ships in like, like whatever 3D Studio Max or whatever, and just stuck them together and painted over it. Because like the butt is like, we've seen that round configuration many times before.
Right.
On various vessels, but not like that exact thing. It's even very similar to what's on the Phoenix, right? That back section of the Phoenix. Just with white lights instead of red or blue lights. That middle section, I know I've seen that before. It's like an escape pod from Enterprise.
It's almost like the Star Trek version of like the Lost in Paradise from like the front of it, right? It has like a cruise ship kind of feel.
That fits with what it's supposed to be, though.
Yeah, exactly. That's actually a fun ship from Fifth Element. It's an interesting idea that there's instead of like a resort or whatever, there's like a mobile stress relief facility.
You ever figure though, like all the stuff that like Star Trek crews go through, there's got to be like an entire industry, and it's probably, I mean, obviously not an industry.
Oh wait, no, this is perfect. So I'm working on a project, just sort of looking at like, I don't even know how to explain it. It's sort of a writer's guide for Star Trek ships. Like, here's all the naval history that like inform Star Trek ships. Here's what Starfleet is, like, just top to bottom. If you don't know anything about Star Trek ships, but you want to write, fan fiction and you want to do a good job, be thorough about it. Like, here are all the sections of a ship, like bow, keel, all the naval terms, all that stuff. Anyway, So one of the sections about life on board a Starfleet ship, and one of the sections there is about like mental health, right? And like, how does Starfleet support the mental health of the crew? And so I talk about like, oh well, it's probably pretty progressive attitude towards mental health and mental health support. But the things that you deal with in Starfleet mean that sort of the job of the mental health professional must be much more challenging. And I use O'Brien as an example. And I list out all of the terrible shit that O'Brien went through. And like, can I read it to you guys? I brought it. Can I read it to you?
I mean, like, I know what's coming, and it's like that's the whole joke, right? O'Brien must suffer, and it starts in TNG. Right. Everybody talks about his time in DS9, but like he doesn't have a good time in TNG either.
No. Yeah, so I mean, like, starts off, you're like, oh, okay, he was a combat veteran, right? Experiencing the brutality of the war against the Cardassians.
Right.
He is later possessed by an alien entity who attempts to take control of the Enterprise and threatens to kill his own wife and child in power play. He watches himself die several times in DS9 Visionary and DS9 Whispers. He experienced 20 years of prison in the blink of an eye in DS9 Hard Time. He's framed, captured, and tried by a hostile foreign power in DS9 Tribunal. And he also saw his daughter transform into an adult who did not recognize him and could not communicate with him, then saw this version of his daughter disappear in DS9 Times Orphan. So, like that's messed up, man.
You gotta think, okay, well, we're getting off track here, but I think it has to be said. So Miglimo just must suck, okay? Like they had a problem, a mental health crisis, where the engineers were overworked in this episode. Did they say, let's go to Miglimo to have him fix this?
Right.
No. They had to hire a contractor.
Here's the thing. This may be a standard Starfleet thing, where it's all like, once your entire crew, or like there's a threshold of like so many people,
there's enough people.
It's like, O'Brien went through a traumatic experience, send him to the ship's doctor, no big deal. But when it's the entire engineering department, then you're like, you know what? I will call in the specialists.
Yeah. But it's also, they do have, like, it's in the 24th century, right? They've got mental implants, they've got holodecks, they've got telepaths, right? Like, they have a lot more interesting tools in their toolbox to deal with mental health. I thought it was cool that in Strange New Worlds, Fox was like, the mind meld is not a shortcut to mental.
Yeah, that was a good line.
Cure mental trauma.
I know, and you know what? But here's the best part about that. Just taking that in the Strange New Worlds context. Okay, it's a great quote. Except he has direct experience with that with his sister.
Right. I think it's one of the things where they said that because they didn't want people to think that it was, but also I think it's okay to consider the idea that just like we have better treatments for physical problems now than we used to in the 1800s, that maybe in the 24th century or the 23rd century we'll have better technology, be it telepathy or whatever, digital mental interfaces, like that make addressing those kinds of issues more straightforward than they are right now. So anyway, it's interesting. I mean, it's cool that a ship can like spawn this whole weird conversation about mental health and therapy and trauma.
The ship, man. The ship design, I like it.
Back to the ship. I wonder, I mean, it's got to be some, because it's not a Starfleet ship, obviously.
Do we know
so there's some third party involved here. Well, I should say it doesn't follow the standard like kind of look.
It doesn't have the
saucer.
I mean, it's entirely possible it's like a Federation ship. It's not within the hierarchy of Starfleet.
Yeah, I mean there are certainly civilian ships that are operated by civilian organizations that aren't Starfleet. I mean the easiest, it's not a perfect allegory, but the easiest allegory for Starfleet is like the US Navy or the US Coast Guard, right? Like, and so there are going to be other people that have starships that just don't fall under that umbrella.
Sure. I just feel like Starfleet can't decide. Like they're willing to like throw literally one counselor on a ship with hundreds of people on it, but then like if it gets too bad, it's just not Starfleet's problem. Okay, let's hire a contractor to deal with that. Anyway, before we move on to this particular shot, we're getting really into the minutia here, but looking into the detail of these of this external shot that shows the Dove, there are these other ships in the background here. One of them is clearly an Andorian ship here, but there is another sphere ship. When you talk about the Olympic-class, there's kind of a vaguely Olympic-looking ship in the background there.
I noticed that, yeah.
And I think we've seen this before, and I feel like its overall like design and detail is a callback to like TOS ships, where they're just kind of a shape on the screen. It's like you can't really make out what that shape is supposed to be.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
You're not supposed to freeze frame it and look at it like we are, basically.
But it's got Andorian ship on there, which, I love the Andorian ship aesthetic.
The Andorians have mental problems too, man. They need to use the Dove's services. The Andorians, I mean, they're not going to shove a counselor on a ship.
Because all Andorians are well adjusted.
No, is that what happens? They're totally fine with mental prisons and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, makes sense. All right, let's move on. The episode Reflections, where we get Rutherford's internal battles. We get the Sampaguita, which is the young Rutherford's racing ship. Faces off against the Delta Flyer. I have questions about the ship. So first of all, it's a unique design. And speaking of circles at the back of the ship, like much like the Dove, this has a similar situation here. But it's obviously a racer. I don't understand racing in Star Trek. Like, do they race at sublight speeds? Because they seem to in this episode. Like, why does it have nacelles?
Well, I mean, you got to get to the racetrack.
They race at warp sometimes?
But there could be parts that, like, okay, we fly through this series of rings, then we warp to the next planetary orbit, and then we race through these things, then we warp to the next.
Well, yeah. But there's also, I think there's implications in the TNG Tech Manual and some other places that even though Impulse is sublight, there's still some subspace field usage to maneuver a ship at sublight, because Star Trek ships are not actually coherently designed for just standard like Newtonian style propulsion, right? Like the position of the impulse engine on a lot of them is not like, especially on like the Constitution class ship, not really in the right place.
But you're telling me that the
push the
center
vessel
of gravity or the center of mass is not all the way near the top of the Constitution class?
Right. So the subspace field that the nacelles generate is kind of the MacGuffin that offsets a lot of this weird stuff. And so you could make an argument that the nacelles, even though they're not racing at warp, like having a warp field around the ship to offset some of its mass and provide some structural integrity, like helps it be a better racer. But that's subspace, is the kind of the great cover your ass
that's right
methodology in Star Trek.
Subspace fields, kids. If you're ever confused about any problem in Star Trek, the answer is subspace fields.
I do. I mean, like, I actually think the design would be stronger without the nacelles, though.
If they just took the nacelles off of that, it's just it just looked like a rocket, basically. With the
I don't think it looked like something from Wipeout, which is it's not bad. Like, I think Wipeout's chips
I would
are
think
cool.
just bringing the nacelles in closer to the main body would really improve the design, and possibly like having them at a slight angle. I don't know.
Yeah.
I like it.
Just gonna staple them on there. It's definitely a unique design. I like it because it's taking some chances here. Like, we don't really see a lot of other ship designs that are like this. So
I can appreciate
it.
One thing about it that I kind of putting it next to the Delta Flyer, I feel like they're just so incredibly different.
Makes it a little
that
look
it's
too
kind
carny,
of jarring.
too cartoony.
Not cartoony, but I don't know the right word. But it's just sort of like they don't feel like they're from the same show. You know what I mean? Like the Delta Flyer is like has a very specific aesthetic, and they might have actually used the Eagle Moss model for this. Because they're both definitely 3D models in this case. I think in some cases we've seen paint overs here when there hasn't been a lot of dynamic motion, but in this episode they're definitely using 3D models, and they're probably, maybe they built their own Delta Flyer model, but it's also possible they got the Eagle Moss model for this thing. So I don't know. I think there are things they could have done to kind of ground them a bit together a bit more.
That the whole them being so drastically different that they feel like they're two different shows, it actually really fits with the thrust of the episode and trying to create like these are two very different Rutherfords.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's fair.
That's true.
I think that's fair.
Not to dwell too long on the Delta Flyer, but I think we've only seen this very briefly in season 2. Looks good.
Well, and I think this one is a CG model, as we mentioned. But when we've seen it before, I think it's always been like background paint
Oh,
overs.
I see. Yeah, it's definitely a 3D model here. That's right.
Yeah,
it looks good.
It also does a nice thing that I like.
Yeah, that's good.
And this goes back to the original design of the Delta Flyer. The nacelles hang down, so they have 50% line of sight.
Well, you know what's funny about that is, and they actually open up. Like originally, and we don't do this in STO. I don't know, and I don't know how often they actually did this in the show, but
very often.
But I think the first time
right?
it goes to warp, the nacelles actually animate. Yeah, they pop out or whatever, which I thought was pretty cool.
I forgot about it.
And something people missed. Yeah.
Yeah, for Voyager they'd already done it.
They lost the animation of it extending nacelles.
I'm pretty sure. I mean, Delta Flyer was pretty late in Voyager, and I think they had totally transitioned to CG by then. By the time they added, so it like really wouldn't have added any money. You know, if they had the animation once, they can reuse that animation in new shots pretty easily. But that's one of the things that's interesting about CG, where I suppose it could happen with miniatures too. But CG models I think are a lot more portable, where you can be like, you can hire one house to build the model and do some shots, and then they don't get the next season or whatever, and so they have to package everything up and send it off to the next house that does, but maybe they're not going to include a memo about the animated nacelles or whatever, and so it just doesn't do it anymore, right? So I don't know enough to say that's what happened, but it's certainly a possibility.
Well, and I think a lot of it too, Voyager was very like frontier CG era where the transition was happening. So it's entirely possible that they said, hey, we're going to do this cool animation sequence, and they did it for the one episode, and then they're on to the new hotness, and they just completely forget to include that in future scenes.
Well, let's move on. Later in the same episode, we get the Drydock showing up, chasing the Sampaguita and the Delta Flyer. It's not the first time we've seen the Drydock, but it could be the first time we've seen the 3D model used. I know it looks good. I don't know. Do you guys have any feedback on the Drydock? I mean, we've seen this design since Next Gen, so
yeah, I think it's a great ship.
Yeah, I love the Drydock. I love the message that its shape and size kind of conveys. Mm-hmm. I'm just disappointed they didn't continue with that overall aesthetic in subsequent ships for the Romulans. They instead moved over to like the winged Valdor type design.
Yeah, the Valdor is a lot more compact than the Drydock, but the Drydock is like, I think they wanted something that kind of made they made such a big deal in the first season of Next Generation about how great the Enterprise D was,
right?
And then the Drydock shows up and it's twice as big, right?
Right.
Yeah. But I also like the fact that so much of that is just open space, so it's all kind of like pomp, right?
Right. Well, so the Drydock was designed by Andy Probert, who is, of any starship designer, very much a stickler for the rules you mentioned about the nacelles connecting to each other, having line of sight between each other. And I think that's why the Drydock has that big
open space
space in the middle, is because you look at where the warp grill, the green glowing squares are, and those are totally exposed to each other. And that's actually, so when they were doing pre-production, or I think like storyboarding for the motion picture, Andy Probert worked on the motion picture Enterprise, and there was a stage where they were going to have like crackling energy between the two nacelles.
I remember reading about that.
So the inside of between the cells. So like in the motion picture Enterprise, the inside of the nacelles are lit, but the outside of the nacelles are not. And the idea was that there was like energy going between the two nacelles, and that's why you needed the line of sight that you talked about. And so I think that's sort of why the Drydock has this big negative space, because Andy Probert was honoring that rule.
Right.
And I think a lot of it too is they wanted to create a ship that was bigger than the Enterprise, more menacing, and without it being, really bigger, if you know what I mean.
Right.
Bigger in like span, but not in mass.
Right. Without like exponentially more massive.
Right. Yeah.
Because when you increase the volume on something, the mass increase is exponentially bigger, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Cool to see the Drydock.
Well then, it seems our garrulous gabbing has gone grandiose, and we'll have to split this ship into a second segment. You've just finished part 1 of the ships of Season 3. Why not come back for part 2? Or, if that seems like more effort than it's worth, you can DM Stavros directly, and he'll send you crayon drawings of all his favorite starships.